Rights were not something that governments owned and gave out to people, she explained. They belong to each of us. People are born with rights. Governments are formed to protect those rights. She called them God-given rights. She also talked about the hateful oligarchy of sex, by which she meant the rule of men over women. Half the people were ruled by the other half, she said. We the people does not mean we the male citizens, she said. And, she added, it was downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty. The Rochester judge did not agree, but he was smart enough to know that most people in Rochester were being swayed by Susan Anthony's speeches. So he had the trial moved to a little town 28 miles away. 28 miles was a good distance in horse and buggy days. When the day came, the courtroom was packed. A former president, Millard Fillmore, was one of the spectators. Newspaper reporters sat with their pencils sharpened. Judge Ward Hunt was a foe of women's rights. He wouldn't let Susan Anthony speak for herself. He judged her incompetent. Anthony's friend, lawyer Henry Selden, said, "Every citizen has a right to take part upon equal terms with every other citizen. And," he said, "political bondage equals slavery." Judge Hunt turned to the jurors. Under the 15th Amendment, Miss Anthony was not protected in a right to vote. Therefore, I direct that you find a verdict of guilty. Now that was something no judge has the right to do. Judges can tell a jury about the law. They can't tell juries how to vote. The clerk of the court said to the jury, "You say you find the defendant guilty. So say you all?" No juror said a word. Judge Hunt said, "Gentlemen of the jury," of course, there were no women, "you are dismissed." The judge ruled Susan B. Anthony guilty. Not a juror had spoken. Most were outraged. Now the issue was no longer the vote for women. It was an issue of a free trial in a free society. This trial had been a joke. Anthony's lawyer reminded the court of Matthew Leon, who had been imprisoned and fined for saying bad things about President John Adams. That was during the time of the Alien and Sedition Acts, when free speech had been in trouble. Later, the court apologized, and Matthew Leon's fine was paid back, with interest, to his heirs. That didn't matter to the judge. Susan B. Anthony and the three men were fined and sentenced to jail. The New York Sun wrote of a jury of 12 wooden figures, moved by a string pulled by the hand of a judge. A Utica, New York paper said Judge Hunt had outraged the rights of Susan B. Anthony, even though the paper's editor didn't think that women should vote. Another newspaper said, "The right to a trial by jury includes the right to a free and impartial verdict." Susan B. Anthony refused to pay her fine, and Judge Hunt, perhaps knowing he had gone too far, never demanded it. She did not go to jail. No appeal was ever heard by a higher court. The three male registrars spent 5 days in jail. They didn't mind it a bit. While they were there, they ate fancy meals sent by the 16 women they had registered. Then President Ulysses S. Grant pardoned them. At the next election, Rochester's male voters re-elected them by a large vote. But Susan Anthony and America's woman lost out. Before we move on to the next page, here's a picture, and the caption for it says, "Susan B. Anthony wrote about her trial for years afterward." So moving on. If she had won that court case in 1873, women all over the nation would have been able to vote. The word citizen in the 15th Amendment could have been interpreted to mean men and women citizens. Judge Hunt decided things otherwise. At the time, many men, and women too, believed he was right. It would take much work by Susan B. Anthony and others to change their thinking. It would take another amendment, the 19th, before women had the rights of full citizens. Some remarkable women. Clara Barton established the American Red Cross. Alice Hamilton was the first woman professor at Harvard Medical School. Anna J. Cooper, born in North Carolina to a former slave, earned a master's degree at Oberlin College and a doctorate at the Sorbonne in France. She became principal of Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C., and made it one of the finest schools in the nation. Otelia Cromwell, another descendant of slaves, earned her Ph.D. at Yale after attending Smith College and Columbia University. She became a teacher and writer. Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote books that made women question many of their old ideas. Helen Keller proved there are no handicaps to a person of determination and intelligence. Helen was born in 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama, lost both her hearing and her sight at 19 months after a fever left her unconscious. Most people thought she was beyond hope. But 60 years earlier, another blind deaf girl, Laura Bridgman, had been taught to read with raised letter books called Braille. So Helen's parents decided to look for a teacher for Helen. When they found Annie Sullivan, they gave their daughter someone who would transform her life. At first, Keller, who was 7, tried all her bad girl tricks on Sullivan. But Annie Sullivan was patient, and Helen was very bright. She learned to read Braille, and she also learned to write using standard letters. Helen Keller attended Radcliffe, a very demanding women's college. Annie Sullivan went with her, fingerspelling the professor's words into Helen's hand. Together they studied English literature, history, math, French, Latin, and Greek. Helen Keller went on to write books, give speeches, and travel widely. Everywhere she went, she inspired others. One admirer said she showed the almost indomitable power of the human will. So that was chapter 14. I hope you all have a great day.